All right, so we're diving into Nietzsche today.
We are.
And, you guys gave us quite a challenge with this one.
Yeah, Nietzsche's always a challenge.
Yeah. The genealogy of morality to kind of guide us through some of the trickier concepts.
Right.
So, are we ready to kind of untangle some of his ideas about good and evil and, what it means to be, like, truly great?
Absolutely. I think this is going to be a fun one.
Okay, great.
So Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morality is a pretty dense book, and he's tackling some really big questions about morality.
Yeah.
Where do our values come from? What do we really mean by good and evil? And like his whole project here is what he calls a revaluation of values.
Okay, so revaluation of values.
Yeah, he's basically saying we need to question everything we think we know about morality.
Okay.
And he actually argues that what we often consider good can actually be harmful.
Harmful.
Especially for those who are striving for greatness.
Wow. Okay, so like when you say harmful, I'm guessing we're not talking about your grandma's like always be kind morality.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
This isn't about like basic human decency.
Okay.
He's targeting a specific kind of morality, particularly like the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Okay.
This kind of morality that emphasizes meekness, compassion, selflessness.
Yeah.
And he thinks these qualities, while well-intentioned, can actually hold people back from achieving truly exceptional things.
Okay, so we're going to, I think, unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because when you say, like, it can be harmful, were we saying that he's, like, endorsing, this kind of cutthroat, ruthless ambition and competition?
Well, not necessarily.
Okay.
But he does use some pretty interesting examples to make his point.
Okay.
So he talks about figures like Beethoven,
Oh, wow.
Steve Jobs, Kobe Bryant, people who were undeniably great in their fields,
Right.
but who were also known for being pretty ruthless and relentless in their pursuit of their goals.
Yeah. Okay, so these are not people who are, like, shrinking violets. Exactly. Okay.
So if traditional morality is kind of holding us back, what does Nietzsche propose instead?
Right. Does he give us a different set of rules?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
He's not interested in just replacing one set of moral rules with another.
Okay.
What he wants to do is expose the underlying psychology
Right.
of how these values are formed in the first place,
Yeah.
and how they influence our actions and our judgments.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's calling for a kind of radical self-awareness, a questioning of everything we hold dear.
So I think this is where his idea of master and slave morality comes in.
Exactly.
And, and it's not just like the words themselves, but it's kind of what they represent.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that the very language we use to describe good and evil actually reveals a lot about power dynamics.
Okay, so in the lecture, he talks about this pretty stark contrast between these two types of morality.
Right.
Can we kind of dig into those a little bit? What are those key differences?
Sure. So Nietzsche points to ancient Greece and Rome as examples of cultures with what he calls a master morality.
Yeah.
These cultures celebrated strength, nobility, individual achievement.
Right.
Like, think of the heroes of the Iliad,
Yeah.
driven by ambition and a thirst for glory.
Okay.
Their good was tied to excellence, not to pity or compassion.
And so that's very different from what emerged with Christianity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
With Christianity, we see this shift towards humility, compassion, self-sacrifice as the highest virtues.
Right.
And Nietzsche saw this as kind of a reaction to the power of the masters, driven by what he called resentment.
Okay, and so this idea of resentment, I think that's one of those things that really stood out to me from the lecture.
Yeah.
Can we unpack that a little bit?
It's a really central concept for Nietzsche.
Okay.
He argued that the slaves, those who felt powerless or marginalized, they couldn't really compete with the masters on their own terms.
Right.
So what they did is they kind of flipped the script. They turned what was once considered good, things like strength, power, ambition, into something evil.
So almost like a defense mechanism.
Exactly.
Right.
It's like in Aesop's fable about the fox and the sour grapes.
Right.
The fox can't reach the grapes, so he decides they must be sour anyway,
Right.
devaluing what he can't have.
Yeah.
And Nietzsche believed that slave morality works in a similar way.
Okay, so yeah, that's a pretty cynical view of human nature.
It is.
But I gotta admit, like, I think there's a truth to it too.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all experienced that feeling of like wanting something we can't have and then kind of convincing ourselves that it wasn't that great anyway.
Totally. Think about it. Like, the last time you really wanted something you couldn't get,
Yeah.
did you maybe start to find reasons why it wasn't actually that great after all?
Right.
That's resentment at work.
That's resentment at work.
Right.
Okay, so we got these masters who embrace power and strength and ambition.
Right.
We got the slaves who, are driven by this resentment, and they're trying to control the masters through guilt and moral condemnation.
Yeah.
But there's this third group that the lecture talked about too, right?
There is.
The priests.
Yes.
Where do they fit into all this?
Yeah, so this is where Nietzsche's analysis gets even more nuanced.
Okay.
He sees the priests as representing what he calls the aesthetic ideal.
Okay.
They're not driven by worldly power or pleasure, but they choose a life of self-denial,
Right.
rejecting those things to achieve a higher state of being.
Okay, so on the surface, that sounds almost the opposite of the master mentality.
It does.
But I feel like Nietzsche's going to have a different take on it.
You're picking up what he's putting down.
Okay.
He argues that this self-denial, this turning away from worldly things, is another even more subtle expression of the will to power.
Wait, hold on. How can denying yourself be an expression of power?
All right.
That seems counterintuitive.
Think about it this way.
Okay.
By rejecting the things that most people crave, wealth, status, even basic comforts, the priests position themselves as superior.
It's more spiritual,
Right.
closer to God.
Hmm.
So it's a different kind of power.
Right.
But power nonetheless.
So they're playing a different game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But their renunciation actually gives them a kind of authority.
Okay.
Yeah, think of figures like Gandhi or the Dalai Lama.
Okay.
Their asceticism actually enhances their moral authority.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's interesting you say that because I'm thinking about my own experience, when I was living in that Tibetan monastery.
Yeah.
And the monks there lived incredibly austere lives.
Right.
Simple robes, basic food, hours of meditation.
Right.
But that detachment from material possessions actually gave them a lot of power within the community.
Absolutely. It's a perfect example of how self-denial, when it's strategically deployed,
Yeah.
can be a potent form of influence.
Yeah.
And Nietzsche was very attuned to these subtle power dynamics.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah.
So we've got these, these three different forces kind of at play here.
The masters driven by strength and ambition, the slaves fueled by resentment, and then these priests who seek power through self-denial.
Right.
It's like this complex psychological drama unfolding throughout history.
Yeah.
But, with this clash, how does Nietzsche explain the dominance of Christianity?
Right.
Because it seems kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah.
And Nietzsche's answer really lies in understanding how effectively Christianity appealed to these deep-seated human needs.
Yeah.
The resentment of the slaves and the universal need to find meaning in suffering.
Okay, so let's start with resentment.
Okay.
How did Christianity tap into that?
Well, you know how slave morality kind of flips the script on master values?
Right.
Strength becomes evil, ambition becomes greed, pride becomes a deadly sin.
Right.
This resonates really deeply with those who feel powerless.
Yeah.
It offers them a way to morally condemn those they envy or resent.
So instead of feeling inferior, they can feel morally superior.
Exactly. And Christianity provides this really powerful framework for channeling that resentment to a righteous cause.
Okay.
It's a way to justify feelings of anger or injustice by framing them as a struggle against evil.
Okay.
Think of like the early Christians,
Right.
persecuted and marginalized,
Yeah.
finding strength in their faith
Yeah.
and seeing themselves as morally superior to their Roman oppressors.
Right. It's a way to kind of reframe your situation.
Absolutely.
And what about the need to find meaning in suffering?
Right.
How did Christianity address that?
That's the other key piece of the puzzle.
Amen.
Life is full of pain and hardship.
Yeah.
And humans have always sought ways to make sense of it all.
Right.
For the ancient Greeks, it was through their myths and tragedies,
Yeah.
exploring, the capricious nature of the gods and the often cruel hand of fate.
Right.
But Christianity offered a very different narrative.
Right. Suffering wasn't meaningless or random.
Right. It was a test of faith,
Okay.
a path to redemption, a way to prove your devotion to God.
Yeah.
Think about the image of Christ on the cross,
Right.
suffering for the sins of humanity.
Yeah.
It's a powerful symbol of how suffering can be transformed into something meaningful,
Wow.
even redemptive.
But Nietzsche saw a darker side to that. Yeah.
He did.
Yeah.
He was suspicious of any system that glorified suffering
Right.
or used it as a tool for control.
Okay.
And he pointed to some, disturbing aspects of Christian doctrine
Yeah.
to support his view.
Yeah, like that passage we talked about from Tertullian,
Yes.
where he's like practically gloating over the prospect of seeing his enemies suffer eternal punishment in hell.
It's pretty chilling.
Yeah, it makes you question whether that kind of love is really love at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Nietzsche saw this as evidence of how slave morality can disguise itself as compassion
Right.
while actually perpetuating a kind of spiritual sadism.
So by offering this narrative that explains suffering,
Right.
by tapping into resentment and promising redemption,
Yeah.
Christianity managed to gain this psychological foothold
All right.
that even the masters couldn't resist.
It's a compelling argument,
Yeah.
but it does raise a question.
Oh, yeah.
Couldn't Christianity be true
Right.
and have spread through these psychological mechanisms?
Right, because just because something has a dark side
Right.
doesn't mean it's entirely false.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like that example from the lecture about climate change.
Right.
Just because some scientists might have their own biases or agendas
Right.
doesn't mean climate change isn't real.
Right.
Couldn't the same logic apply here?
Sure.
Maybe Jesus really is the Son of God.
Yeah.
And maybe the faith spread because it genuinely resonated with people.
Yeah, that's a valid point.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that Nietzsche wasn't trying to definitively prove or disprove any religious claims.
Okay.
He was more interested in understanding the underlying psychology of belief,
Okay.
the forces that shape our values and our worldviews.
So he's offering a genealogy of morality, not a refutation of Christianity.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think his point is that we should be skeptical of any belief system
Yeah.
that gains power by exploiting our psychological vulnerabilities.
Mm.
Whether it's a religion, a political ideology, or even a personal philosophy.
So a call for critical thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Examining the motivations behind our own beliefs,
Yeah.
rather than just accepting them at face value.
But of course, there are critiques of Nietzsche himself.
Right.
You know, his focus on the will to power seems pretty central to his thinking.
Yes.
And it's a concept that's been challenged by other philosophers.
It has.
Yeah. So what are some of the main criticisms there?
One of the main criticisms is that he overemphasizes the will to power as the main driving force behind human behavior.
Okay.
Some argue that he reduces the complexity of human motivation
Right.
to this one rather simplistic principle,
Yeah.
and that it leads him to neglect other important aspects of human experience.
Like our need for connection and belonging.
Exactly.
Yeah.
His focus on this kind of sovereign individual
Right.
seems to downplay the role of relationships and community
Right.
in shaping who we are.
It makes me wonder how much his own life experiences shaped his thinking.
Right.
He struggled with illness and isolation and lack of recognition
Yeah,
during his lifetime.
he did.
It's easy to see how those experiences might lead someone to idealize the lone wolf.
Right.
Yeah.
That individual who stands apart from the crowd.
And the lecture even suggested that Nietzsche's misogyny and his eventual descent into madness
Right.
might offer insights into his work.
Yeah, it's a delicate subject.
It is.
But I think it's a valid point.
Yeah.
Our personal experiences inevitably shape our worldview.
And that's true for all of us,
It is.
not just philosophers.
Right. It's a reminder to be aware of our own biases,
Right.
how they might be influencing our interpretations.
So with all these critiques in mind, where does that leave us with Nietzsche and his genealogy of morality?
Yeah.
Is he offering us a path forward or just a more cynical view of human nature?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one we're going to explore further in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
But I think it's safe to say that Nietzsche, even with his flaws,
Yeah.
offers us a really powerful lens
Okay.
for understanding the complexities of morality
Yeah.
and the challenges of living in a world without easy answers.
Right. So we've made it through, Nietzsche's critique of morality.
We have.
We talked about master and slave morality and this whole idea of the aesthetic ideal.
Right. Yeah.
But where does it all lead?
Yeah.
Like, what's the takeaway?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah, it's one thing to analyze all these concepts.
Right.
But how do we actually, apply any of this to our lives?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's one that Nietzsche himself doesn't really offer any easy answers to.
Okay.
He's not interested in giving us a prescriptive moral system,
Yeah.
a set of rules to follow. In fact, he actually sees that kind of rule-based morality
Right.
as a symptom of the slave mentality.
Right. So it's not about becoming like a Nietzschean disciple.
No.
Yeah, right.
He wants us to use his ideas as a springboard
Okay.
for self-discovery,
Right.
for questioning everything we believe and
Yeah.
creating our own values.
You know, and the lecturer even talked about how reading Nietzsche can be like this really liberating experience.
It can be.
Yeah, like shattering the illusions that are holding us back
Yeah.
and opening up this whole new way of seeing the world.
Right. There's definitely a sense of liberation
Yeah.
that comes from questioning these deeply ingrained beliefs
Right.
about good and evil.
But, you know, it's important to acknowledge that this kind of freedom
Yeah,
can also be daunting,
it can.
right? It can lead to that sense of nihilism,
Right.
that feeling that nothing really has meaning.
That nothing has inherent value.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront the void.
Yeah. But wouldn't Nietzsche say that confronting that void is necessary? Yeah.
He absolutely would.
Right.
He believed that embracing what he called the death of God,
Right.
the realization that there's no external source of meaning,
Yeah.
is essential for becoming a truly free
Okay.
and creative individual.
So it's about taking responsibility
It is.
for creating your own meaning,
It is.
even in a world that might seem inherently meaningless.
Exactly.
That's a radical shift in perspective.
It is.
It's like moving beyond those comforting narratives and like those prepackaged values
Yeah.
that we've just inherited,
Yeah.
you know, from culture and tradition.
Absolutely. And that's why Nietzsche is often seen as such a dangerous thinker.
Right.
He doesn't offer us easy answers or
Right.
a comforting worldview.
Right.
He forces us to confront the depths of our own being
Yeah.
and the responsibility that comes with creating our own values.
You know, even the lecturer himself admitted
Yeah.
that reading Nietzsche had a profound impact on him,
Right.
but that he didn't fully embrace his philosophy. So it seems like these ideas,
Yeah.
they can be exhilarating, but also really unsettling.
It can be both.
So what's the ultimate takeaway here?
I think the most important thing is to approach his work with a critical and discerning mind.
Okay.
Don't take his pronouncements as gospel truth,
Right.
but don't dismiss them out of hand either.
Oh.
Engage with his ideas.
Right.
Wrestle with them. See what resonates with you.
So use his work as a tool for self-reflection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For understanding the forces that shape our own beliefs and values.
Nietzsche offers us this powerful lens
He does.
for examining morality.
Yeah. The origins of morality,
Yeah.
the complexities of human motivation.
And the challenges of living in a world without those predetermined values.
Absolutely.
A world without easy answers.
Right.
So it's a challenge, but it can also be exciting.
It can be.
And I think Nietzsche wouldn't have it any other way.
I don't think he would.
He wouldn't want us to just passively, you know, accept his ideas,
No, he'd want us to grapple with them, make them our own.
to create something new.
Exactly. Out of the void.
So if you're looking for like a comfortable prepackaged philosophy,
Yeah.
Nietzsche's probably not your guy.
Probably not.
But if you're ready for this journey of self-discovery,
Yeah.
to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself and the world,
Yeah.
then Nietzsche's genealogy of morality might be a good place to start.
It might be the perfect starting point.
It's a deep dive
It is.
that could change the way you see yourself and the world around you.
Absolutely.
So we encourage you to explore his work
Yes.
and see what resonates with you.
See what sparks your own journey.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.